Welcome back. Today, we're going deep on Apple. And right now, Apple is one of the most interesting puzzles in the entire market. Because on one hand, you have this financial fortress, an absolute giant, just shattering revenue records. But on the other hand, that same fortress is kind of under siege, with a whole lot of investor anxiety that's been dragging down the stock.
Okay, let's start with the good news, the fortress itself. For their first fiscal quarter, Apple didn't just have a good quarter, they brought in nearly $144 billion. Just try to wrap your head around that number. It is an absolutely staggering amount of money for just 3 months of business.
But then, here's the siege. Even with that historic, record-breaking performance, if you'd bought Apple stock at the beginning of the year, you'd actually be down almost 8%. The market is looking at all that success, and it's basically shrugging. It seems to be saying, we're worried about something else.
So that's the big paradox we're going to unpack today. How can a company be printing money faster than ever before, but at the exact same time be losing the faith of so many investors? Let's get into it.
To really get this, you first have to appreciate the sheer scale of Apple's financial power. We're not just talking about good numbers here. We're talking about figures that make other huge companies look kind of small by comparison.
And check this out. It's not just that one big revenue number. The growth is just powerful, right across the board. Compared to this time last year, revenue is up almost 16%. Net income is also up 16%, and earnings per share, that jumped over 18%. This wasn't just hitting what Wall Street hoped for. This was blowing past expectations.
So how are they pulling this off? Well, it's that classic Apple 1-2 punch, and it's working better than ever. First, you have the iPhone, making up nearly 60% of their sales, just continuing its global domination. And then, that huge base of iPhones acts like a perfect funnel into their super profitable services division. The App Store, Apple Music, iCloud. That now makes up more than 1/5 of their entire business, and it's growing like crazy. And this right here really shows you their secret sauce, their global execution. Just look at the growth in Greater China, up almost 38% in 1 year. This is a market that so many other companies find impossible to get a foothold in, and Apple is just thriving. It's a total masterclass in how to run a global business. Okay, so record-breaking quarter, printing money, dominating the globe. It seems like the engine is running perfectly, which brings us right back to that paradox. If everything is this good, what are those storm clouds on the horizon that have investors running for cover?
All right, now we have to flip the coin and look at the other side of the story. Because if you look just beneath the surface of those incredible earnings reports, you start to see some pretty significant challenges, some cracks in that shiny armor that are getting harder and harder to ignore.
You can really group all the worries into 4 main areas. First, and this is the big one, is the fear that Apple is falling behind in the massive shift to AI. Second, you have regulators in both America and Europe taking a very close look at their App Store. Third, the simple fact is that the global smartphone market just isn't growing anymore. And finally, you hear more and more people complaining that Apple's software quality is slipping.
Let's start with that slowing market. Research is now forecasting that the entire global market for smartphones is probably going to shrink this year by about 2%. And for the first time in a long time, it looks like even the mighty iPhone isn't going to be immune to that. Its sales are expected to fall right in line with the rest of the market. The days of just selling more and more phones every year might be over.
And then you have this software issue. For decades, Apple's whole brand was built on this promise that it just works. But you see comments like this one all over the place now, basically saying the hardware is great, but the software is getting buggier and less user-friendly. When you're a company built on a reputation for quality, that kind of sentiment is a really big deal.
But out of all these concerns, there is one that towers over everything else: artificial intelligence. The market doesn't see AI as just another cool feature. It sees it as the next major computing platform. And the big fear is that Apple, the king of the last platform, is showing up dangerously late to the party for the next one. This isn't just about Siri not being smart enough. This is a potential threat to their whole business model.
Now, Apple's official line on this, which you hear from Tim Cook a lot, is totally consistent with their history. They almost never invent a new category from scratch. What they do is they wait, they watch, they perfect the user experience, and then they come into the market with a product that just defines it for everyone else, right? The iPod wasn't the first MP3 player. The iPhone wasn't the first smartphone. Their whole strategy is to be the best, not the first.
So here's the billion-dollar question.
Does that patient strategy still work when this new race is moving this fast? I mean, you've got competitors like Google and Microsoft weaving AI into everything they do at a wild pace. The risk for Apple is that the whole way we use our devices could change, shifting away from tapping on apps to just talking to an AI. And if that happens, the App Store, the very heart of Apple's profitable services empire, suddenly becomes a lot less important. And this timeline really paints a picture of that risk. While competitors were shipping major AI features all through late 2025 and into this year, Apple's big answer, a totally redone AI-powered Siri, was reportedly delayed. It's now expected in May, maybe even later. It's that gap, that space on the timeline, that is making investors so incredibly nervous.
So you have these two powerful and totally opposite stories about the same company. On one side, a financial juggernaut. On the other, a giant facing some really big threats. So what happens from here? What are the key things we all need to be watching for?
I think you can boil it down to 3 critical events. First and foremost is that new AI-powered Siri launch. Its success or failure will tell us a ton about whether Apple can truly compete in this new world. Second, the next earnings report is going to be huge. We'll see if iPhone demand is holding up in this shrinking market. And finally, everyone's always watching for a surprise, a one more thing that could change the whole story.
So to sum it all up, here's the Apple paradox in a nutshell. The bull case is simple. This company is an unstoppable money machine with a locked-in ecosystem and incredible global reach. But the bear case is just as compelling. They look like they're falling behind in AI, regulators are closing in, and their biggest markets are starting to slow down.
And that leaves us with the one big question that everything else hinges on. We know their financial fortress is incredibly strong. The numbers don't lie. But is that fortress, which was built for the last era of technology, ready to fight and win the battles of the next era? Can it defend its kingdom in the new age of AI? That is what the entire market is waiting to find out.